I never expected to wake up to unsettling clues on a seemingly ordinary morning. That day began like any other, though a nagging feeling of unease lingered in the air. I had woken up later than usual, assuming the house would be quiet with Mom away on her business trip. Instead, I found an unexpected message waiting for me, a red lace lingerie set neatly folded on my bed with a small note tucked underneath. The note simply read, "You deserve more." My heart pounded as I stared at it, and I instantly knew who was behind this strange gesture. John, my stepfather, had always been the picture of perfection, impeccably dressed in tailored suits, his expensive watch glinting in the morning light, and a calm, assured demeanor that commanded respect. Yet, in that moment, something in his behavior suggested a hidden agenda. Even though he carried himself with an air of refined politeness, the gesture and the note made me feel exposed and unsettled. I tried to rationalize the situation as I got ready for the day. Perhaps it was just a mistake, or maybe someone else in the house had played a prank. However, a part of me couldn't shake the sense that John was deliberately trying to send me a message. As I moved through my morning routine, I couldn't help but replay the image of that neatly folded set of red lace and the cryptic note in my mind. When I made my way downstairs, I expected the house to be empty. Instead, in the kitchen, I found John quietly sipping his coffee. His greeting was courteous. "Good morning, Lila." His tone was calm and measured, yet I couldn't ignore how his eyes lingered on me just a little too long. I was still dressed casually in my pajama shorts and a loose tank top, and despite the simplicity of the morning, I felt a growing disquiet. John's behavior seemed different, more calculated, almost as if he was waiting for something to happen. After a few moments of silent breakfast preparation, he casually mentioned that it would be nice to have dinner together that evening. "Since your mom is away," he said, "why not enjoy a quiet dinner, just the two of us?" His words were soft and unassuming, yet an undercurrent of tension laced his invitation. Unsure of how to react, I simply nodded, hoping that the evening would pass without incident. I spent the rest of the morning in a swirl of mixed emotions. While I tried to focus on my daily tasks, thoughts of the red lace set and John's subtle but unsettling attention continued to haunt me. I began to question whether there was more to his invitation than met the eye. Was it merely a friendly dinner, or was there something else behind his well-rehearsed politeness? Later that day, as I stood before my mirror, I carefully considered my appearance for the evening. I chose a dress that was modest yet flattering, a choice that I knew might be misinterpreted by someone like John, who was known for his refined taste and could read into small details. I found myself second-guessing every decision, wondering if I was inadvertently inviting the wrong kind of attention. The mirror reflected back not just my image, but also the inner conflict and apprehension that I was struggling to hide. By the time I descended the stairs for the evening, the tension in the house had grown palpable. John's expression shifted ever so slightly. His eyes, which had always been composed and measured, now held an intensity that made me shiver. He greeted me with a quiet, "You look beautiful," a comment that felt overly calculated and carried more meaning than the words alone should suggest. I forced a smile, determined to keep my composure, but inside, I was already bracing myself for what the night might bring. That evening, we left for a dimly lit restaurant, a setting more appropriate for an intimate date than a family dinner. The ambience was subdued, with soft lighting and hushed conversations all around, adding to the overall atmosphere of restrained tension. John ordered a bottle of wine without asking if I wanted some, and his actions throughout the meal were measured, his every move laced with a subtle insistence that made me increasingly uncomfortable. His eyes often seemed to study me with a lingering attention that was hard to dismiss as innocent. Our conversation at dinner was polite yet formal, and I found myself increasingly preoccupied by the silent messages conveyed through his glances and measured tones. The restaurant's quiet intimacy only amplified my inner turmoil, and as the meal progressed, I began to sense that this was not merely a casual outing. There was an unspoken undercurrent in every word and every pause, a tension that grew with each passing moment, leaving me to wonder what John's true intentions might be. The ride home was equally silent, with the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. Every minute spent in that car felt longer than it should have, and my mind kept returning to the mysterious lingerie set and note that had been waiting for me that morning. As soon as I stepped through the front door, I retreated to my room, hoping to find solace in the familiar surroundings. However, the calm of my personal space was shattered when I discovered the same red lace set, with its accompanying note, placed deliberately on my bed. The repetition of the message, "You deserve more," left me feeling even more confused and disturbed. The evidence was unmistakable. John was sending a series of deliberate signals, and each one deepened the mystery of his intentions. The red lace lingerie, the carefully worded notes, and the subtle yet invasive attention he gave me all converged into a troubling pattern. I felt trapped between the need to understand his motivations and the instinctive desire to protect myself from a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. In the hours that followed, I found myself caught in an internal battle. Part of me wanted to dismiss the events of the day as a misunderstanding, a misinterpreted act of kindness, or an odd attempt at humor. But another part of me, the part that had sensed the unease from the very start, could not ignore the nagging warning that something was very wrong. I began to question every interaction, every polite gesture, and every carefully chosen word. Was I imagining things, or was John deliberately trying to manipulate my feelings? As night settled in, the house grew quiet once again, yet the oppressive atmosphere remained. I sat alone in my room, trying to make sense of the events of the day. The soft hum of the night outside did little to soothe my racing thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder if the subtle signs I had been receiving were the prelude to something more significant, a shift in the dynamic of our household that I was powerless to control. Even as I lay in bed that night, the image of the red lace set and the note replayed in my mind, a constant reminder that the carefully maintained facade of normalcy was cracking. I realized that the events of that day were only the beginning. The signals had been sent, and the line between acceptable behavior and manipulation was becoming increasingly blurred. I knew that, in the coming days, I would have to confront the truth of what was happening in my home, a truth that was both painful and unavoidable. I drifted off to sleep with my thoughts swirling in a mix of fear and determination, aware that the comfort of routine had been disrupted forever. The day's events had planted a seed of realization that sometimes, beneath the veneer of perfection, lies a darker reality waiting to be uncovered. The following days passed in a heavy, silent rhythm that made every minute feel longer than it should have. I tried to settle into my usual routines, yet the unsettling events of the previous day clung to me like a shadow. Each time I glanced at a familiar corner of the house, I felt the weight of unspoken expectations press upon me. John continued his daily interactions with a calm exterior that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Every morning began with a mixture of routine and apprehension. I found myself constantly scrutinizing every detail, from the way I dressed to the choice of my words, hoping that by keeping a careful distance, I might diffuse the tension that was steadily building. In the kitchen, as I prepared my breakfast, I couldn't help but notice John's quiet, measured greetings. His "good morning, Lila" felt rehearsed, as if each word was chosen to remind me of the control he seemed intent on exerting. I started to wonder whether the polite facade was merely a tool for his manipulation, a way to keep me on edge without ever crossing an obvious line. Throughout the day, I found solace in simple tasks, tidying my room, reading a book by the window, or quietly sketching in a notebook. Yet even in these moments of relative peace, the memory of that red lace set and the haunting note, "You deserve more," replayed in my mind. It was as if these messages were not just isolated incidents, but pieces of a larger, disconcerting puzzle that I was slowly beginning to see. Each small detail, the lingering gaze, the calculated compliments, the repeated placement of mysterious items, hinted at an agenda that I had not been fully aware of until now. In the afternoons, the house took on an oppressive stillness. While John attended to his own routine, I noticed that every movement he made was laced with an intensity that unsettled me. I tried to focus on my schoolwork, though even the simple act of reading felt charged with an unspoken tension. Every so often, I would catch him looking my way from across the room, his eyes full of a quiet insistence that left me both curious and uneasy. It was not overt, but it was persistent, a gentle reminder that my privacy was, in some subtle way, being invaded. Even the time I spent outdoors in the small garden behind the house did little to alleviate my anxiety. The sunlight, usually a comforting presence, felt dim and heavy. As I tended to the flowers or raked the leaves, I sensed that John's presence was never far away. Often, I would glimpse him on the porch, his profile outlined against the sky, as if he were silently observing every movement. The boundaries between personal space and unwanted intrusion began to blur, and I found myself wondering whether I had unknowingly allowed this overstep to become a part of my daily life. One particular afternoon, as I was gathering my thoughts in a quiet corner of the garden, John approached me with a measured calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. "Lila," he said softly, "I was wondering if you needed any help with the chores today." His offer was phrased in such a benign manner that it should have felt comforting, yet the tone carried an undercurrent of expectation. I hesitated, caught between the need to be polite and a growing urge to assert my own space. I replied, "No, thank you. I've got it under control," trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said nothing further. Yet that fleeting moment of interaction left me with a lingering impression of his constant, almost imperceptible monitoring. I couldn't shake the sense that every act, every word he spoke, was part of a calculated effort to keep me in a state of uncertainty. Over the next several days, these small moments began to accumulate. The kitchen greetings, the measured conversations during dinner, even the way he would adjust his tie before passing by me, all served as silent reminders that something was off. That evening, after a quiet day spent mostly in solitude, I returned to my room only to find another unsettling clue. On my desk lay a small package, a bottle of perfume, its glass reflecting the soft light from the bedside lamp. Attached was a note that read, "This set will suit you perfectly." The sight of it sent a familiar chill through my body. The perfume, like the red lingerie from before, was an unmistakable sign that John's messages were deliberate. Every time I encountered these symbols, I felt a growing mix of dread and determination. It was becoming impossible to ignore the fact that his behavior was not an accident, but part of a pattern that needed to be confronted. As night fell and the house settled into its usual quiet, I found myself unable to sleep. The persistent hum of the outside world did little to drown out the thoughts that raced through my mind. I lay awake in the dark, contemplating the repeated signs, the calculated words, and the way they seemed to erode the safety of my own home. I knew that I could not allow this cycle of manipulation to continue unchecked. I began to document every detail in a small notebook, a silent witness to the growing discomfort and the undeniable evidence of John's intentions. Each entry was a careful, measured account of the day's events, a way for me to reclaim some control over my own narrative. Writing became both a refuge and a tool, a means to understand the depths of the manipulation that was taking place. I recorded his offhand remarks, the way his eyes seemed to follow me even when I thought I was alone, and the subtle yet persistent reminders of the red lace and the perfume. One particularly long, restless night, as I was piecing together my thoughts and the fragments of the day, I realized that I had to face the reality of the situation. The signs were clear. John's behavior was not a harmless quirk, but a deliberate attempt to blur the boundaries of respect and privacy. It was as if he was testing the limits, trying to gauge my response. The realization filled me with a profound sense of urgency. I needed to break free from this silent pressure before it consumed more of my sense of self. In the dim light of dawn, with the remnants of a troubled night still fresh in my mind, I resolved that I must find a way to speak out. I knew that confronting the issue would be daunting, both because of the power dynamics at play and the possibility of further consequences. Yet, the growing conviction within me that this behavior was unacceptable had reached a tipping point. I could no longer allow the manipulation to continue unchecked. The next time John's polite greetings came, I resolved to be more aware, to assert my own space with clear boundaries. I found myself standing a little taller, even as I struggled with uncertainty. I began to question every gesture, every word that might be loaded with hidden intent. This newfound awareness was both liberating and frightening. It marked the beginning of a journey toward reclaiming control over my own life. As the days turned into a blur of routine and underlying tension, I became more attuned to the small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The sound of footsteps in the hall, the faint click of a door closing, the echo of a quiet conversation, each became a symbol of the pervasive atmosphere of control that had infiltrated my home. I realized that the challenge ahead was not just to confront a single act of manipulation, but to reclaim the sanctity of the space that was rightfully mine. By the end of this period of mounting uncertainty, I understood that I had reached a crossroads. The careful documentation in my notebook and the inner resolve that had grown over countless sleepless nights signaled that I was ready to take the next step. Although I was still deeply unsettled by the deliberate signs and John's invasive presence, I now knew that silence was no longer an option. The time had come to face the situation head-on and reclaim my dignity. In the days that followed my growing awareness, An inescapable pressure built within me, a sense that I could no longer live in quiet despair. Every detail in our daily routine, once taken for granted, now carried a weight of hidden meaning. The pervasive tension in the house, the subtle signals, and John's constant, calculated behavior all conspired to push me toward a critical moment of decision. The pattern of unspoken messages continued. Mornings began with the same measured "Good morning, Lila," delivered with a smile that now felt both rehearsed and loaded. Even as I tried to maintain a calm exterior, the notebooks I had kept each night bore witness to the growing anxiety and dread that accompanied every encounter with him. In those pages, I detailed every offhand remark, every lingering look that made me question my own space. Each entry was an act of defiance, a small reclaiming of the control I felt slipping away. One afternoon, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my room, I realized that silence was no longer a refuge, it was complicity. The careful documentation had become a lifeline, a silent promise that I would not let the manipulative behavior continue unchecked. I reviewed my notes and found a pattern emerging, a series of small yet unmistakable actions that left little doubt about John's intentions. It wasn't merely a matter of misunderstanding. It was a deliberate plan to blur the boundaries between propriety and invasion of privacy. That evening, as the house settled into its customary quiet, the atmosphere felt even heavier than before. The soft hum of the outside world was drowned by the tension within these walls. I could sense that tonight would be different. The accumulated pressure was on the verge of exploding. I resolved to be vigilant, to watch for any sign that might provide the opportunity to finally confront the situation. As I moved through the hallways later that night, a chill ran through me when I overheard John speaking on the phone in a low, measured tone. Though I couldn't catch every word, phrases like "everything is under control" and "once I get what I need, it will be over" pierced through my thoughts. Those words, spoken so casually, confirmed the worst of my fears. It wasn't a fleeting misinterpretation, it was a deliberate statement of intent. The realization hit me hard. If I continued in silence, I would lose the sense of self I had fought so hard to maintain. The next morning, determination surged within me. I knew I had to take the next step. It wasn't just about protecting my privacy, it was about reclaiming my autonomy and dignity. With a racing heart, I decided that I would no longer allow myself to be a passive observer of John's invasive behavior. I began to prepare mentally for the confrontation that was coming, a conversation I knew would be difficult and fraught with risk, but one that was necessary for my own well-being. In the hours before dinner, I tried to remain as composed as possible. I gathered my thoughts, revisiting the pages of my notebook and consolidating the evidence of his calculated actions. The red lace set, the repeated notes, the quiet yet persistent surveillance, all of these had culminated in a realization that I could no longer ignore. I would have to speak out, and though the prospect was terrifying, I could no longer allow fear to dictate my life. As the evening approached, John greeted me as he always did. His "good evening, Lila" was delivered with the same smooth cadence, yet I felt a steely resolve behind my smile. I met his eyes with an uncharacteristic firmness, determined not to give in to the usual cycle of uncertainty. For the first time, I felt ready to assert my own boundaries and reclaim control over my space. We sat down to dinner in our usual spot at home, a modest table in the softly lit dining room. The conversation, once punctuated by subtle gestures and lingering looks, now carried an undercurrent of tension I could no longer ignore. I listened carefully, my mind racing through the countless moments that had led me to this point. Every seemingly innocent remark and every carefully timed pause now felt like pieces of a larger, manipulative design. Unable to keep the mounting tension bottled up any longer, I cleared my throat and spoke. "John," I began quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me, "we need to talk about what's been happening lately." The room fell silent, and for a long moment, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. His eyes widened slightly, a subtle change in his expression betraying his surprise. "What do you mean, Lila?" he asked, his tone careful yet laced with an edge that hinted at defensiveness. I took a deep breath, recalling every detail, the carefully placed items, the repeated messages, the tone of his conversations, and pressed on. "I mean the notes, the gifts, the way you've been behaving," I said softly. "I've noticed a pattern, and it's making me very uncomfortable. I deserve to feel safe and respected in my own home." My words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as I continued. "I've been keeping track of everything, and I know exactly what's been going on. John's face betrayed a moment of shock before his practiced composure returned. He tried to interject, to offer an explanation or a justification, but I pressed on without giving him a chance to speak. This isn't just about small gestures, John. It's about the feeling that I'm being manipulated and controlled. I won't allow that to continue any longer. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound was the soft clink of cutlery and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I could feel the tension in the room build as John struggled to find his words. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed, his gaze falling to the table. Mila, I didn't realize you felt this way, he murmured, his voice betraying a hint of regret that felt more like a reflex than genuine remorse. I do feel this way, I said firmly, meeting his eyes with an unyielding determination. I've sensed it for a long time, and I can't ignore it anymore. I need to be free from this atmosphere of control. I deserve to make my own choices without feeling pressured or manipulated. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, as if the room itself were holding its breath. In that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I had crossed a point of no return. The careful equilibrium of our home was shattered, replaced by a raw and urgent need for change. I had finally summoned the courage to confront the situation head-on. John's face softened for a moment, and I could see a flicker of something, perhaps regret or resignation, in his eyes. But even that was not enough to diminish the resolve that had built up inside me over so many sleepless nights. I understand, he said at last, his tone measured but distant. If this is what you want, I'll give you the space you need. Though his words offered little comfort, they marked the first step toward dismantling the insidious control that had haunted me. In that exchange, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, a recognition that the confrontation had come at a great personal cost. I realized that the man who had once seemed so infallible was now stripped of his carefully constructed facade, exposed by the very actions he had taken. That night, as I lay awake in my room with a sense of cautious hope, I understood that the journey toward reclaiming my dignity was only just beginning. The confrontation had been necessary, and though it left scars, it also opened the door to healing and personal empowerment. I clung to the belief that by speaking out, I was taking back the power that had been slowly eroded over time. In the coming days, I resolved to be even more vigilant in protecting my space and asserting my boundaries. I knew that rebuilding a sense of safety and trust in my own home would take time, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I sensed that the cycle of manipulation was coming to an end. In the weeks that followed our confrontation, a tentative calm began to settle over the house. I slowly rebuilt my sense of safety and reclaimed the independence that had been overshadowed by fear. John kept his distance, and while echoes of his past manipulation still lingered, I focused on healing and rediscovering myself. I returned to the simple joys that once defined my days, quiet afternoons with a favorite book, reflective walks in the garden, and long conversations with Mom that helped restore trust and understanding. Each small act of self-assertion became a quiet rebellion against the oppressive shadows that had once loomed so large in my life. The journey was neither swift nor free of pain. Old scars, both visible and hidden, served as constant reminders of a time when I felt utterly powerless. Yet with each passing day, I discovered a newfound strength. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. I began to document my thoughts, my progress, and the moments of hope that pierced through the darkness, even if only briefly. This inner journey reawakened the passion for life that had long been stifled by control. By confronting the darkness head-on, I reclaimed not only my personal space, but also the essence of who I am. I realized that while my past would always leave its mark, it no longer defined my future. With a renewed sense of purpose, I embraced each new day as an opportunity to rebuild my world on my own terms. The memories, though painful, became lessons in resilience and self-respect, reminding me that I alone hold the power to shape my destiny. Now, as I look forward to a future built on dignity, courage, and the unyielding belief that every step I take away from those shadows is a step toward a brighter, more liberated tomorrow, I know that I am finally free to be myself.